I'm the son of immigrants. My parents came from Egypt. My dad came here in 1969. The first TV broadcast he saw was the moon landing. My mom came here in 1974. The first TV broadcast she saw was Nixon resigning. So, highs and lows, but we survived. They're Coptic Christians, which means they're a religious minority in Egypt. In Egypt, on your ID card, it says your religion. So sometimes they'd go to the bank and the banker would say, I'm sorry, we don't have your money today. Or sometimes someone would be politically active and they would disappear. And sometimes their churches would be bombed. So they came here for a better life, and they literally came here why every other immigrant comes here, for a better life and with nothing. My parents knew that education, and of all places to have free college, Egypt has free college. My parents knew that education was their only way out. They borrowed against their house to send me to some of the best schools in this country. They settled in a little town called Highbridge, New Jersey. When I was born, it had 3,500 people in it. Today, it has 3,500 people in it. So, when I was in 5th grade, my dad gave me this book called The Buck Stops Here. And it had a drawing of each president, and under each president, it had a little rhyme so you could remember the presidents in order. And I will never forget what he said to me. He said, "This isn't my country. I'm a guest here. I'll always be a guest here, even when I'm a citizen, because I wasn't born here, but you were born here. People will trust you. You can make this country better for me, for you, and for our grandkids who aren't even born yet." And I took that to heart. So we fast forward a little bit. I went to Columbia University like one of my heroes, Barack Obama, and like him, I studied political science. And after that, I went to Stanford Law School, where I met my wife. This is how a guy from New Jersey ends up in the Northwest. She grew up in Richfield. Of all places. A Jewish girl who grew up in Richfield. Like a unicorn, very rare. So I graduated from Stanford Law School, and my dad, again, with the words of wisdom, says, "You tell me the probability of a man from southern Egypt who grew up in a village with no water, no running water, no electricity. What's the probability of that person becoming a lawyer in the United States of America and graduating from Stanford Law School? Almost zero." And it hit me hard that I owe this country a debt of gratitude because it made my story possible. And if you ask me why I'm running, beyond the issues, the one reason I'm running is to make other people's stories possible. Yeah. Always. So I graduate. How much time do I have left? I graduate from Stanford Law School. I have $180,000 in student loans. So what do you do when you have $180,000 in student loans and you went to Stanford Law School? You go to Wall Street. I was on Wall Street as a banking lawyer for 3 years, and these are the 3 most significant years ever, 2007 to 2010. I watched Lehman Brothers fold. I watched Goldman Sachs scramble to figure out how all these banks are going to be bailed out. I watched banks violate anti-money laundering regulations. I watched banks bet for and against the same risky investments. And worse, the people who worked there were making fun of the people who were losing their houses and the main streets that were being decimated at the time. I lasted there 3 years for a reason. And I realized there that these banks don't just undermine our economic system, they undermine our political system. They put money into campaigns, they make sure that our representatives in Congress and beyond cannot vote in our best interests. So the #1 issue for me, before I talk about the other issues, is anti-corruption, getting money out of politics and getting power back into the hands of regular people. Woo! Once we do that, we can move. We can move on the environment. My son has asthma. He chokes when these wildfires rage for the last 4 years. It's the most heartbreaking thing as a father to see my son choking, struggling to breathe. And people will say, oh, it's a forest management issue. Well, it may partially be a forest management issue, but it's climate change. Mm-hmm. One of my main goals will be a push for carbon neutrality by 2050. Period. We cannot, our time is up. We cannot do this anymore. There is no debate. It's real. My second issue, healthcare. I took my best friend to the ER, not 4 weeks ago. She has cancer. She was in the worst pain of her life. Imagine a Civil War movie where they're amputating a person's limbs. And I said, it's time to go. It's time to go to the doctor. You're going to die. And she says, I can't go because I can't pay. I can't go because I can't pay. She's one of the 56,000 people in this district who have to make the choice between eating and getting better, between housing and getting better, between filing bankruptcy and getting better. That should not ever happen in the United States of America. We need universal no-cost health care for each and every one of us, including mental, dental, and vision care.
Woo!
Like I said in the beginning, this is going to be one of the hardest fought elections in the country. We need your well wishes, we need your support, but we need your volunteerism, and we need your money. It's going to be easily $3 million that we're going to spend. Easily. There are going to be multiple people in the Democratic field, and there's going to be Jamie Herrera Butler in the Republican field, and we need to mobilize. My campaign manager, Linda Garcia, has remit envelopes, and I hope, and I thank you for your time, and I hope that you will support me.
Thank you.
You want to take a few questions?
Oh, yes, of course.
Can you repeat your name?
Peter Khalil.
Thank you.
How do you spell it?
K-H-A-L-I-L.
You sound like the writer.
Like Khalil Gibran, the poet, yeah.
Okay.
That's the way it sounds.
Over here.
Yes, ma'am.
The environmental issues that we're being plotted against one another, you know, that it's either jobs or it's the environment. I find especially challenging. Many of us have been battling coal terminal here. There is a methanol refinery that's trying to go in Kalama. And then the oil refinery has been defeated in Vancouver.
She defeated it. Linda Garcia.
Yeah, she did. She just got an award.
So, what are your suggestions on how communities can focus on more forward-thinking industries than fossil fuels?
Okay. So I think the answer to that question has to do with how we define a green job. A green job isn't merely a job working with windmills or alternative energy. A green job is a carbon neutral job, a job in the information sector, caring professions, teaching, things like that. When you say that there's a false dichotomy between a good economy and a good environment, you're absolutely right. That is a false dichotomy. Because if we kill our environment, we will no longer be able to sustain jobs. People are going to die. We are going to have industries like Willapa Bay oysters, for example, getting contaminated. It's going to kill industry. So I think the way that communities can be more forward-thinking about this is, number one, to redefine what they say when they mean a green job and to incentivize jobs that are carbon neutral and not just in alternative energy. But number two, to reframe that dichotomy. Does that answer your question?
Politically, yes. I understand, you know, that this is a question that's coming from him, and so I don't expect you to have a well-researched answer. I was impressed when I went online and I looked at your background, and I'm really happy that you're here tonight. And I'm glad you're going to run. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will actually, I'm going to be here till the last person leaves, so I will talk to you more about your question. And I'm happy to answer more at length. If you're talking, so you're asking me what policy specifically and in which communities?
Yeah.
Okay. That
Or
is
regions. You know, a regional outlook as opposed to one community at a time.
Okay, so
you know, this is a big river. I mean, we could tie in some industries with each other, and it's not being done at all.
So I think it's not being done because there's too much of an incentive to build fossil fuel infrastructure. So I think the first step, if you're talking about concrete solutions, is to stop building fossil fuel infrastructure. And that will de-incentivize the economic drive to rely on fossil fuel.
Right.
So
the
I think
incentive will be gone.
Right. I would say that would be my first concrete solution.
Okay.
But regionally and community by community, I will research it.
Thank you.
So, do you run for any other offices, and what's been your involvement with the Democratic Party?
I'm a first-time candidate. I have taken an oath, a lifetime oath, to uphold the Constitution as a lawyer. I have been a neighbor, a friend, an active citizen in my community, but I'm a first-time candidate. I don't believe that holding an office qualifies you to hold another office. I think that what you need is somebody who, with judgment, who understands how to legislate, who understands how to look at laws in a way where they look at unintended consequences and they look at the way that those laws will affect people on the ground. So insofar as qualifications, while I have not held office before and have never sought to hold office before, I certainly have the background that's necessary to make sure that we're not putting through policies and laws that affect people in a net negative way.
So, you left Wall Street. How long have you been in our area? What kind of law are you practicing now?
Okay.
Give us a little bit of who are you now?
So when I moved here in 2010, so 9 years ago, I started a mediation and arbitration firm from New York City, from Brooklyn, New York. I started a mediation and arbitration firm, and mediation is basically conflict. That's one of my other qualifications: conflict de-escalation and negotiation. I'm a professional negotiator. I'm a professional conflict de-escalator. I've been doing that for 8 years. I own my own business called Northwest Mediation. So I'm also a small business owner, and I know how the regulatory regime in our country affects small business. So that's what I've been doing. In Vancouver, Washington. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you. In my experience of our local area, this is a very pro-gun, anti-gun regulation area. And Cowlitz has been really decisive in our congressional city action. What is your plan for how to deal with that?
To deal with gun control? Is that what you're saying? So the one thing that I do believe in strongly is universal background checks. I understand this is a culture where we hunt, we target shoot, you will find people of all stripes who are gun owners. And I think constitutionally, that's how it is. But I do support universal background checking and regulation that's reasonable to the community, that's reasonable, that can be implemented, that's narrowly tailored to what the cultures in our communities are. Because what the regulations that work in Cowlitz and in Southwest Washington are not the same regulations that work in a dense city like New York City or even Seattle. So, and I also support the idea that we need to, gun control is also a public health issue. It's a health care issue, if you will. I think that if we have universal mental health care, there will be a reduction in gun deaths, ultimately, and suicides.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question?
Yep.
You mentioned that about consequences and so on and so on. Some of us worked long and hard to get the financial impact of initiatives so that we understand what will happen. How can that be implemented at the federal level? We're certainly not getting that now.
It took
You
me a
mean
while the first time I
how-
saw it too.
When they put in a regulation
Yeah.
and you have to hire 5 more people
Yeah.
in order to implement it,
Yeah.
how would you regulate that to the point where we can look that up at least, what the financial impact of a law was?
Sure, and in theory, you can look it up, but in practice, it's way more confusing. There's an
Yes.
Office of Management and Budget, and you can look at what they projected the cost would be, but you never really know what those itemized costs are, how they evaluated them, and how they came up with those numbers. I think as part of an anti-corruption platform, you would always introduce legislation that makes the government's operation more transparent and simpler. So you're going to have a situation where you say, okay, well there are 8 committees regulating or overseeing this one legislative process. We need to pare it down to 1 committee, and that 1 committee will be responsible for, on a regular basis, on a daily, monthly, quarterly basis, reporting, showing, just like they do for political candidates. I have to show every ounce of money that I take in and push out. There's no reason why we can't do that on the federal level. It is going to be complicated. The other thing is the tax code makes it complicated too. So the financial impact is not just dependent on the money that we appropriate, but it's also dependent on the tax consequences. I do think we need to simplify the tax code. You're going to hear me say this not too much, I hope, but quite honestly, you're voting for a person with judgment who can come in and say, all right, these are the problems, and this is the approach that I'm going to take towards the solution. But I'm not encyclopedic on the tax code, and I've taken so much tax law We're going to have experts come in, and same with the environment. We need to listen to experts, not just experts who are educated and have certain credentials, but people who live in their communities, because there are no better experts than the people who live the issues. So, you know, the long answer is we have to study it. We have to figure out, we have to unravel the tax code and the budget process and the appropriations process. But I'm ready, willing, able, and qualified to do it.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.